and disaster risk reduction. Taking into consideration that this project is a research project with a very important objective, that's also to create impact. I mean, we don't just want to create new knowledge about the subject matter, but also to generate an impact or a change in the society which we are working in, at different levels, at different scales, with different groups, of course. That's why there's so many of us, you know. But this also means a lot of challenges. I mean, it's a challenge for us as researchers, and also a challenge for us to reach more people and actually create that change. So these three workshops that are going to take place, well, the first one is going to be on citizen science today. The second one is interdisciplinary participatory methods. That's going to take place on August 21st. And the third one is participatory methods and reflexivity, which has more to do with our role as researchers in this type of projects, which is going to take place on August 28th. The idea, and I'm going to ask you to always reflect on this, is to think on how we can innovate through these methodologies. We're going to introduce some of them now, I mean, on these three workshops, but we've already been working on several of the different methodologies, talking about them, and what we want in these 3 days, in these 3 sessions, is to think about how we are innovating things as a team, and how these different tools can help us to innovate our research practices so that we can actually generate a change. So the reflections that we'd like for you to have during these 3 sessions are how these tools can create knowledge and at the same time generate impact, and the importance that the process of creating knowledge is just as important as the result. I mean, the way in which I perform my research can also generate impact, not only the final product. And I'm going to ask you to take into consideration these questions during these 3 workshops. How am I innovating through my research methods? Am I doing something new or different? Am I combining methods across disciplines? How can the principles, the methodological principles discussed in these workshops can help me innovate in my own practice? So ask yourself, you know, all the time, I mean, this could help me, this generates curiosity in me, I want to know more about it, I'm going to talk with Jenny about it, I'm going to talk with Eva about it, I'm going to talk with Marisa, with all the different people that are going to be here during these 3 days, right? And finally, to be critical, right? What works and what doesn't work for our research, and more than everything, for the people that I want to work with. I mean, they are the ones that have to be in front of us, you know, the people that we want to work with. So it's just a small introduction to today's new series, and asking you to take into consideration this idea of, you know, this innovation idea to generate change and create impact. Welcome, and thank you very much for participating. And thank you also to the people from the museums that are here. And thank you, Jenny. Please.
Hello. So is there, I'm sorry, I've been, I have to apologize. I've had a very crazy week, and I've only just come back from being outside doing some experiments for teaching. So is there a translated version of my PowerPoint? Is it in my email?
Yes.
Jenny, si quieres comparto yo la pantalla. Yo la tengo.
Jenny, if you want, I can share my screen with you. It says Marisa.
Sure. Is it in my email somewhere? No. Okay. Yes, please share your screen. Thank you. I'll have to tell you to turn the slide, but that's good. Thank you. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background with the citizen science, across the hub, one of my other jobs is to look at and try to learn across the different cities about citizen science. And I think one of the challenges that we have with citizen science, as it is traditionally thought of, it has a particular positionality from the perspective of what Teresa might say. From the perspective of how Teresa might think about it in terms of how we're doing the science. And what we need to do is think about why we're doing it and how it fits in. And we've had quite a lot of discussions about it already. And also there's quite a few people who have some experience. But I thought what we could do today is use today to think about where it sits within the context of more general participatory approaches, and actually take a really critical look at what we're trying to do and come up with some concrete ideas about what we think we'd like to be able to do as a group. And then also use that to actually take some actions after what we're doing in terms of initiating some of the citizen science. Because even with COVID, it's quite possible that we could look at that. This first slide is our wonderful logo for Quito in Quito's Tomorrow Cities. Can I go back to the first slide? Yeah, and basically what it's just encapsulating is that what we're trying to do in this first part of the project is understand something about the things that drive risk. And what the first two sets of seminars have shown us really is how interconnected all these different things are. So all I'm trying to do here is show the different processes that are taking place that are interconnected, all of which combine to generate risk. Can I have the next slide, please? So the next slide shows a little bit what we're starting to think about across the hub of the various different starting points that there could be for taking the approach of citizen science. So there's starting points, and then from our perspective in Quito, we've got sites of, and this is a deliberate word I've used here, invention, because I think one of the things we're going to try to be is open-minded and creative with this. So the different places where we're trying to work, and then the kind of ultimate transformation that we're trying to achieve. And actually, when we're thinking through with citizen science, one of the things we can do is think about the different starting points that we have, which are enacted in at different scales across the city. So either we could be thinking about improving multi-hazard knowledge, understanding what creates vulnerabilities, and then I think very importantly, and this is a really important tension between citizen science as it's traditionally conceived and participatory approaches, which have a very strong agenda for empowerment, aligning ourselves with the perspectives and views of the local communities, or in the case of at the municipality level, the disaster risk reduction with city planning. So that's where we're kind of trying to put ourselves into this area. And I'm just showing you this because this is how we're starting to think about how to compare what we're doing in different places across the hub. Can I have the next slide, please? This quick question then really is what we're thinking of with what citizen science is. So really we can think about it as the participation of people. People is a very general term, from outside professional organizations or with professional qualifications in science in the gathering or analysis of scientific data. And what I'd really like to do is for us to have a bit of an opportunity to think together about what we think participation is in this context. And then very much emphasize that some of the things that we could do with citizen science are aligned with what Teresa was talking about as the agenda for the hub overall for us, which is to try to think about the process of what we're doing as being as important as the product. So if we think about it as anything where we're gathering or analysing scientific data involving people who are not professional scientists, can I have the next slide, please? then there's all sorts of methodologies with which you're probably familiar. There's several that we've already talked about in the context of the hub science in Quito, but I think this is a really nice moment for us to reflect on what we think we want to do. So citizen science is used, for example, by putting out sensors, or in this case of MyShake, which is the thing shown here at the beginning, where actually people use their mobile phones and the GPS in the mobile phones to register shaking and or to get real-time messages about when an earthquake has occurred, so that it actually travels faster than the seismic waves and gives people some warning. Then, of course, I'm not sure if their drone is quite as splendid as the ones that you guys are using at the moment in the case studies. There is the use of drones, which have ways of kind of mapping and understanding the environment. And then there are much more participatory methods, which some of you will be familiar with here. There's a representation here of participatory mapping, where you come together with communities and understand something about the risk environment through how they process and talk about that. But then much more remote methodologies of citizen science, where really the citizens are used as sensors who are not even present in that environment. So this is the planetary response network after Hurricane Dorian in the Caribbean, where basically people from all over the world looked at satellite images and used those to constrain damage that had happened. So there's all sorts of different levels of which we have this interaction between different citizens. Can I have the next slide, please? And one of the things that we've done recently is actually thought about citizen science, which was, if those of you who've had a chance to read the manifesto will see, it was originally conceived either in the context of sustainable development or in the context of ecology, where basically we were involving citizens in observations or participation in their own environment. But there has been some of these initiatives here, as I've mentioned, which have relevance to hazards. And we did a recent literature review. And one of the things I kind of want to excite you about here is what this tile shows is the relative proportion of hazards that are being monitored via the process of citizen science. And the really key thing that I want you to understand is that there's very little action, surprisingly, in that any citizen in the environment is never really concerned with one hazard in isolation. There's very few citizen science initiatives that are used to try and understand multi-hazards. So you can see that there, the light blue triangle all represents those. And you can see that by far the most predominant methods of citizen science are those associated with earthquakes and flooding. And the other thing to point out is obviously we understand disasters in a very nuanced way now. We understand risk in a more nuanced way. And a lot of citizen science initiatives where we use things like sensors or drones are very strongly associated with either damage estimates in the aftermath of a disaster, which is arguably too late in terms of risk reduction, or as early warning in the run-up to a disaster. And we're all about integration into planning. So something else to think about in terms of citizen science initiatives is really trying to push what is happening with this initiative in terms of actually thinking about risk and the hazards in the environment at the points at which we can actually act to improve people's preparedness and thus actually reduce risk in the event of a disaster. So this just shows where in the disaster continuum, either throughout, it's a very small proportion, before, these are the early warning sensors, damage sensors, and then you can see very relatively few that are actually concerned with all of those things. So I think that's something that we can really think about and push forward with what we are doing here. Can I have the next slide, please? Oh dear. This should be coloured in red. So what I'm proposing, those of you who've read the manifesto, is that we start to think about actually the sensor type work that we do, so placing either seismometers or for example, rain gauges into the communities, that we actually take a starting point that is actually improving knowledge. And as Teresa said, there are all sorts of different types of knowledge, and I'll come back to that in a little minute, all of which are really relevant when you start to think about hazard risk as opposed to just the hazard in isolation. So that's what I would imagine is our starting point, and our starting point here is to go into the case studies. But just because I'm saying that now doesn't mean that you should agree with me, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to have a discussion to really think about where we think the best place are. But I'm suggesting that that's the best place that we would go, and we can really contribute to multi-hazard risk reduction through that way. Can I have the next slide, please? So one of the other things about the position of the manifesto is really how we're kind of thinking about that process of working together. And something quite useful to think about that I came across this week is thinking about really generating a culture of questions. One of the real challenges with citizen science is often what people expect from us with these instruments is some certainty about what is and is not risky, and expect a map and definitive questions. And that's because we kind of imagine science as a culture of answers. But actually what we want to be doing is thinking about asking the right questions together in the first place. So we can start with different levels of expertise, as I've represented here. So we're starting, if we start with multi-hazard knowledge, it's kind of inevitable that we're going to have a slightly better idea of what's going on just with the hazards in terms of what's going on. But that actually through the process of working together, what we do is kind of create and ask the right questions about what is important about those hazards in terms of reducing disaster risk. So that's what I've tried to represent here with the mountain of local expertise, kind of adding to the hill of knowledge, and then basically working together to create ourselves as interdisciplinary experts. And I guess the argument here is we don't necessarily need to start with citizen science where we ask the communities what they want monitored or what is important and then only act on what they say. We can acknowledge that we've got imbalances in expertise but also power. And the absolute key to this bit is the process of working together, which is where we're going to kind of generate the extra knowledge. And I guess that's kind of a little bit what was going on there with the manifesto. And I think it's an important thing for us to think about in terms of this work. So can I have the next slide? So I think it's really important, and that's what I want us to do with the first exercise after Marisa and Giuseppe have introduced us to some nice examples, is to think about why not citizen science. Hopefully there's some of you in the room here who don't actually think it's something useful, and that's something something useful that we can actually explore. So one of the things that is raised is that citizen science is extractive. So if you're just using citizen science to gather data about hazards, that data is taken off, analysed, and then put for the benefit of someone far away from the citizens involved. It can be extractive, it can even be exploitative, it raises expectations. I know there's all sorts of tensions about people perhaps living where they shouldn't live, or thinking about that. The idea is to actually work together, but quite often citizen science can raise all these sorts of power problems and expectations. We can impose a scientific worldview on a complex problem where the scientific worldview might not represent the best solution. And actually one of the things that I think we should think about really carefully as a group is actually when you look through the literature, there's no real evidence, I think, that it works. It's not because the evidence isn't there, it's because there's very, very few end-to-end studies where people really look at the process and understand the process and think whether that is actually changing things in terms of disaster risk. There tends to be an initiative. Often there's even an event where people understand it better, but actually one of the things that we could do extremely well in this is actually make a significant contribution to evidence gathering about why this works. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, I've just put these two diagrams here. Thank you so much for translating the text on those, whoever did this. We decided that my powers with Google Translate would be better off with a proper translation this time. So this is a more traditional Arnstein's ladder of participation is a very easy starting point in terms of some social science perspectives on the problem. And this is a perspective given by Mookie Hackley, who works explicitly on citizen science, looking at that degree of collaboration. And I think that's one of the things we really want to talk about today, is thinking about how much collaboration is necessary in the beginning, and really what's most important to us is how we engage with everybody, not necessarily that we start immediately with something where we have asked the citizens to define the problem for us. To some extent, do we want to say, well, there's some problems that we think are there. We think it would be really, really helpful, for example, to measure rainfall. So what we should do is have an open and questioning process where we both learn through that, rather than say, well, that's not proper participatory work, so we're not going to do it. So this is just kind of thinking through some of these different issues that there are in terms of thinking about the value and the worth when you're trying to trade off gaining new knowledge versus empowering people through the process that you're going through. Can I have the next slide, please? And so finally, what I thought I'd finish off with before Giuseppe and Marisa are going to come up with a couple of examples to kind of run through some of these ideas, just to get your creative juices and ideas flowing, is thinking about why to do citizen science. So at the best, it can also be something that increases our knowledge, but is also empowering. And I think that's possibly a really good starting point for us. It generates knowledge that is important to our problem. I think one of the things we can all concede is that we don't understand well enough even what multi-hazard is, what a multi-hazard process, what a multi-hazard impact is. So we might be able to generate data that helps with that. And I think that's why we might have that starting point. Because science, because actually learning and understanding things is always just useful and interesting for the sake. And then of course the process, that conversation, that knowledge, that bringing together the mountain of local expertise with the hill of expert hazard knowledge is something that means we're all going to stand a little bit taller when we come to combat disaster risk. So that's it for me for the moment. I'm going to come back with a challenge for you, but I think now Marisa and Giuseppe are going to give us a couple of quick examples.
Before you start, if someone has a quick question about this, Jenny, would you like to answer those, or afterwards, after the two presentations?
I don't mind.
Okay, so ¿alguien tiene alguna pregunta para Jenny?
Does anybody have a question for Jenny? Or, I mean, just don't forget them, and we can do them before we go to the breakout groups, you know, after Marisa and Giuseppe present them. Thank you. Hello with everyone. And welcome. Me and Giuseppe have prepared a presentation focused on what Jenny already talked about. I mean, showing you a couple of specific examples. I just wanted to emphasize on the fact that citizen science is a doorway to a scientific democracy. What do I mean by that? We are gathering knowledge in a collaborative way, you know, among scientists, yes, but also among citizens, you know, to reach a level of understanding and knowledge of science.
Hello, everyone. The outline of the presentation is quite simple. We will go through some example of citizen science methods and approaches in DRR. Some of them have been already described by Jenny. And then we will talk a little bit about the challenges of doing citizen science, and which can be some of the open questions that these challenges or these opportunities bring into our work in the Quito Hub. So if you can go on the next slide, Marisa. So the first, there are of course a lot of examples of citizen science methods and approaches in the RR. Jenny already mentioned them, so I will go very quick on that. On them. Of course, the citizen science can be used to monitor potential hazards and to strengthen early warning systems. There are a lot of work in Latin America about this. But can be also used for decision making, so how to manage or to improve existing infrastructure, how to contribute to policy making, and also how to contribute to urban planning. Of course, they are also used for environment and human health, for example, for water and air pollution, and the risk and post-disaster damage assessment. There are a lot of citizen science projects focusing on education, or particularly of particular kind of citizens or the whole community. And of course, they have the final goal of community empowerment, but also of vulnerability reduction. Although I have to admit that I found a lot of projects on potential hazards, but probably a little bit less or indirectly targeting the vulnerability reduction. Next slide, please, Marisa. Well, this slide should be titled not crowdsourcing, but probably technology is a better title. But anyway, just to let you know, just to gather, let's say, the number of citizen science methods that use the technology and crowdsourcing. So for sure, crowdsourcing data. So for example, the weather amateur stations, there are a lot of examples in Europe around this, but also the volunteered geographic information, and online mapping, web-based platforms, social media, using smartphones and using apps. So Jenny already mentioned this. And also using drones. So drones is more technological than a crowdsourcing example. And of course, the sensors that we would like to use in Quito. Just to say that, of course, there's examples, there's citizen science methods can run parallel or can complement other citizen science or non-citizen science methods. So I think one of the strengths of these methods is that they can be used together or they can complement each other, but they can also be used in to complement non-citizen science activities. Marisa, you can go ahead.
Bueno, como nos decía Giuseppe,
And as Giuseppe was talking about, the citizen science, and Jenny also talked about this, is in essence participatory. But this participation does not always reach all levels. And that's why we use different methods. In this case, the participation involve a larger participation of people and citizens in general. Are these visual tools, pictures, videos, or drawings that tell testimonies, right? They tell evidence, testimonies, whether that is of past events that are related to hazards, but also they allow us to open up a space to tell these stories, right? The stories of how people live. And this can be done through different spaces, such as narratives, workshops. There's a lot of work that's been done related to art and scenes, and particularly with theater. In this image, we show you a work that was done to evaluate damages. The citizens took pictures of their households and helped the researchers create these damage maps, right? So this, as we can see, is a larger participatory level that citizen science cannot always, accomplish. Sometimes the citizen only shares his or her data, but doesn't really understand it in the end. So we have actually bet on the examples, as initiatives that we can actually implement in Quito, particularly to understand in larger scale how communities live, but also how they can be benefited from science. Up next, I'm going to show you certain community works that can be linked to citizen science and that can pose a work opportunity for us. This is the case of Guardianas de las Laderas. It's a project that started in 2003, a response in Manizales in the face of floodings and current landslides. Particularly in year 2003, they had around 150 landslides, many of which were caused the death of many people. So the municipality and the community got together to create this project, this program, Guardianas de la Ladera, and it's very important because it's current. It's happening nowadays. It involves many women. It's a project that's led by women. It's led by women. I mean, women are the ones that work, and they are women that are in front of the households. We didn't know the exact translation for that term, but it's the women that represent the main economic source of their households and also the main economic base for their children. It's important the work that they do because apart from doing this monitoring, they work on the cleaning of these spaces, as you can see on this picture down here. Thanks to the Guardianas de las Laderas that are in charge of the cleaning and maintenance, this infrastructure have been able to maintain, and they have reduced the maintenance costs that at first were in charge of the municipality, and they did really weren't efficient. They receive a comprehensive information, not only on cleaning and maintaining the hillside, but the municipality also gives them talks and trains them on how to different subjects, right? Like health issues, how to take care of children, education, and entrepreneurship. This project has managed, above all, to reduce disaster risk. There's a very interesting stat that shows that, landslides still occur, but there haven't been any deaths, since as of the beginning of this project. Also, risk perception has increased because they recognize in these guardians, that are their neighbors, the advice that they give them, how to take care of this hillside. So they say that their work has been one way or another facilitated because people don't throw garbage, on pallets. So we have reached a level of consciousness, Also, they have transformed and they have become leaders of their communities. Also, the municipality of Manizales working jointly with Guardianas de las Laderas, and they monitor them, right? So they're monitored by the municipality and they receive, a wage for their work. So the municipality also is creating employment. Additionally, I wanted to show you the example of Ecuador, the program of Vigías del Tungurahua. It's a program that was born in the year 2000. Initially, it's just based on voluntary. It's people that live in the communities that are close to Tungurahua volcano. Initially, they were recruited by the civil defense with the help of the Geophysics Center. This network is still active, and their objective is to report observations, both visual and auditive, from how the volcano is acting. They do it through radios, and they also help in the installment, maintenance, and supervision of the monitoring centers, as well as with data collection. This program has had a large impact and success, given that many of the guides have been able to exchange their experiences in different countries. Also, and what's most important is that they have managed to increase risk reduction related to the volcanic threat, because people as such have managed to improve their trust, the trust that they had and that they lost in the year 1999 towards researchers and scientists in general. Now they're receiving their information on a more positive way, right? Before, they had a negative perception because in the year 1999 they experienced forced evacuations. Now, thanks to these guides, the evacuations that have taken place have been very much, first of all, organized, And secondly, they have been facilitated in a better way, and through that they have accomplished that these guides also become leaders of their community. This project it makes us very proud, us as Ecuadorians, and it also is proof, right, that people can work, they can relate with one another, and particularly that both researchers and citizens can help, and can support this project, and in general just help to reduce risk.
Thank you, Marisa. Of course, citizen science, like any kind of approach or scientific approach or method, has its own challenges or things to take into consideration when we decide which kind of method to implement. Jenny already mentioned some of them, and Marisa will talk a little bit more in detail about some of these challenges or some of these things to consider when we will work in Quito. Of course, we were talking about the different levels of engagement. So there is a ladder of participation. So which is the level of engagement a citizens science project should have. Another challenge is the citizens' expectation versus the reality of the citizen science project. So what citizens expect, what do citizens expect from the project, but what a project should or can actually do. And this is quite important, and a lot of projects have seen a difference between what what citizens expected and what at the end was the result of this citizen science project. Another thing to consider is which kind of impact citizen science project aims to have. So you might have impact mid or medium or long term, and this depends from a lot of internal or external factors. So the kind of engagement of the people, but for example also the lack of resources. A lot of citizen science projects, after some time they stop to work because the project don't have any more money, or the people has no more motivation or no more time to invest in the engagement within the citizen science project. And there is of course a question of communication that probably is also key for the previously mentioned challenge. So it takes a lot of time for the researchers to gain the trust of the community, but you might also have language issues. That is not just the terms of language. Are you using English or Spanish or any other kind of language? But also, are you using? Is the project using a scientific language? Is trying to modify this language to arrive to more people? These are all things to take into consideration when a project is going to be implemented. And there is another point that is the inclusivity. That is not just the participation, but also what do we consider as community? So how much the project is inclusive? Are we excluding those people that are labeled as vulnerable? So let's say the poor, or for example, the migrants or the people with disability. Are you doing a project that is specifically targeting children or people who have already some interest in the topic to be discussed? These are all issues that usually emerge within a citizen science project. Of course, how can a project empower community within decision making? So this is probably a longer term challenge or goal to be discussed when you start the citizen science project. Another challenge, as Jenny was saying, is having this multi-hazard perspective. We don't know yet what multi-hazard mean, but yes, a lot of projects very often tend just to focus on one hazard, but of course they tend to forget to minimize the other kind of hazards. And then there is the problem of the issue of reflexivity. So how to make a project reflexive, how to have this looping and feedback mechanisms with the people within a citizen science project in order to reflect on the step back to reflect on what has been done in the past, to improve what has been done in the future. And of course, a lot of the things are also in Quito, and now Marisa is going to show them.
Bueno, continuando con la charla, en cuanto a las
Moving on.
expectativas,
Regarding the expectations, here in Quito, we have faced this situation already, particularly with the community of Ladera de San Francisco and San Luis de Miravalle. These are communities that are completely different because on the one hand, Ladera de San Francisco is an informal neighborhood, which means that they don't even have sewage systems or potable water, while San Luis de Miravalle is a formal neighborhood that has all the basic services. Additionally, the perception that they have of the threat, despite the fact that both neighborhoods actually recognize the threat, they haven't really lived with it, So in San Luis de Miravalle, we've gone there already, and they tell us that their main worry is that they continue to experience mild landslides that can actually damage the water channel that goes through the neighborhood. On Laderas de San Francisco, on the other hand, we know that they also face events that are related with landslides, and earth slides, but people rather not talk about it. They really don't want to touch that issue because they are afraid that the municipality as such, can see that they are under threat and that they are informal settlement and that they can just be, evac or. So we have to take that into consideration, and we have to see what people expect, from citizen science. What do they want to measure, and what do they want to know? Also, we need to take into consideration that the conditions are different. When we talk about education in San Luis de Miravalle, we haven't really seen any nearby schools where we can have an approach to children or to different stakeholders. The possibility to include or teach them citizen science. In Ladera de San Francisco, while they have schools, they're pretty far away. The children go to different schools that are, as I said, pretty far away to their area, and we can aspire to have a certain kind of work with children through schools, but the Ministry of Health, due to COVID, before COVID, it was very restricted, the access of any type of project to these schools, and now with COVID, we don't even know if they're going to resume presence-based classes or it's just going to be virtual. This is a challenge that we have, and there's also certain conflicts. Conflicts that we face mainly range from conflicts between neighbors up to conflicts with the municipality, particularly in Ladera de San Francisco. This is a very complicated topic because there are many disputes in the neighborhood, because there's neighborhoods that are allies of land traffickers, and also because of the presence of land traffickers. So it's important to be aware of these challenges and to know, who we can include and who we can't, because when we see these conflicts, if someone is, shows an initiative to participate, but that person has a problem with different neighbors, then maybe those neighbors won't want to participate, and there, certain dynamics will come up, and we have to avoid those. Additionally, this inclusion and exclusion topic, this is a topic that, as I said, if I include someone, most surely I'm going to exclude someone else. So there's these topics of, internal disputes between vulnerable groups. The topic of the technological gap, it's something that exists, something that we have seen, in these places. We are in communication with these people, but people, have difficulties in using the tools and difficulty in the digital platforms to ask for help even. They can't even use the cell phone properly. So a very big challenge for us is how to reduce that gap, but also how to adapt, right? So that the citizen science can be actually participatory and not only that, only those that can use their cell phones can actually participate. I mean, the idea is to find tools or other paths so that people can participate and access to science. Also, communication and motivation is very important because from the examples that I showed you, both from Guardianas de las Laderas as Vigías del Tungurahua, base, so that these projects can work through time has been a proper communication. I mean, communicating a clear message. Sometimes as technicians, we can't really explain people the science in an easy way, So we have to be aware of that, and we also have to be open to learn. People know better than anyone their own territory, and we have to be open to this co-production of knowledge. Impacts topic. That's something that we still need to define and that we have to think about. I mean, what's the impact that we want to generate in these communities, both in short, medium, and long term? As Giuseppe said, in long term, we can be talking about, the policy making, but we can also start working on it now. Also, how much we can take from the citizen science, from a participatory approach. It has to include vulnerability issues. The communities that we work in, they are communities that are living under vulnerability situations, and that due to COVID, these have just increased. So I invite you to reflect on, as Jenny said, the process is very important and just as important as their result, and also to take into consideration the ethics about it, how to include citizen science in a space where people do expect an economic compensation, or they do expect certain incentives, and that kind of puts us in a complicated relationship that above all, we have to safeguard ethics. Thank you very much, and we hope that this presentation helped you have a clearer perspective of citizen science, and that we can open up the space for a critical discussion and on how we can create science. Thank you. Thank you very much, Marisa. Now I'm going to open the space up for questions. I don't know if anyone has a question for Jenny, Marisa, or Giuseppe. They can raise your hand on your camera, or also you can raise your hand on the chat function. Alfredo and Marco, I see that they have. Alfredo, please, and then Marco, and then Eliana. Thank you. Hello with everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay, well, so nice to see you. Thank you. Thank you for your presentations. I really like them. They are very much aligned with what we want to do. I just have a short reflection on how to apply this in Quito. I think that there's two scales in Quito. I think that we are working at the city level and at the case level. And that implies a strategy of citizen science that's different in each of these different scales. Talking about the case level, it's probably more related to the experiences that you're talking about, Laderas in Manizales or the Guardianes del Tungurahua, which is the relationship, understanding as citizens, those that actually inhabit those spaces, right? And I want to emphasize what Marisabel was saying. The difference in all three cases is that the science is a part of the problem of the people, in the sense that science is the one that's saying what risk is, why are they in risk, and that they cannot stay in that level of risk. So, I mean, there's a mistrust in science, and in this scientific knowledge. We can also think about the way in how this knowledge was, created. I mean, this idea of no participation, that experts just come in and that the community doesn't know what they're doing. But there's there are effects of what the science says about these territories. And I think that our work or our task is precisely using science as a tool of how to get to know the knowledge. And that should be the case for the people there as well. I mean, not just for the experts. That function needs to be there and it has to be necessary. And on the other hand, at the city level, I mean, if we were to talk about what Marco's working on, right? Governance, risk, there's no civil citizenship, right? Apart from the universities and the experts, that's something that's managed at the municipality level, you know, as institutions, and the science is on the hands of the academy, right, or the geophysical institute, or any entity or body that has that scientific level. But there isn't an observatory, there isn't a second degree organization that can be, you know, a neighborhood organization or something similar. I mean, it's a space where that has a small participation of the civil society. So I think that the strategy there should be to build a sort of platform. You know, I think that the meetings that we had a while ago with Kai and with the institutions, such as the engineers and architects, that we can actually understand them as a sort of civil society that isn't really, you know, from the academy, but isn't, you know, from the political side either, but that they do have different legitimacy levels and influence levels, right? So, and particularly for talking about communication means, right? That's where the flow of information and the demand of scientific information, and the presence of the scientific information in the public debate regarding risk also flows through. So we have to think about how to make risk more citizen, right? I mean, there's different stakeholders that take place into this. I really think that at the C level, that's complicated because it's not community stakeholders, right? I mean, as we already talked about, and we kind of diagnosed, the community doesn't have that scope. I mean, they have a kind of, you know, control over their territories, but they don't have a real access to policy, you know, to shift policy towards a certain way. And I don't think that the product has actually the capacity to do something in that sense. You know, I think that's a bit ambitious. But at least on creating a platform, a civil society platform, based on the professional schools and then the communication means, I mean, I think that's a way that we can make this more, you know, citizen at the city level. And I think that's where the public relationship can actually feel involved, right? I mean, if there's people that are, you know, worried about it and are, you know, supporting this agenda, that can actually make more, gain more for us than this general perspective, you know, client-based perspective. So I think that's a key point. Thank you. Thank you, Alfredo, Marco, and then Eliana. Thank you for your presentations. I have a couple of questions, you know, a couple of reflections. One is more conceptual for Jenny. You made a lot of emphasis on the characterization of citizen science based on how the process is just as important as the result. And my question is, there's a sort of cause and effect in that relationship. I mean, you can base this hypothesis, right? That says co-production of knowledge, for instance. If there's more co-production of knowledge, the product's going to be better, or vice versa, you know, the other way. If there's less participation, the expected products aren't going to be fulfilled completely, or they could be, you know, an alternative hypothesis, you know, counterfactual, right? That despite the fact that there is an interesting co-production process, the result isn't necessarily good. So in what sense, you know, is that possibility that the relationship process result could be understood as a cause-effect question, and how does that change the co-production idea, you know, or the impact itself? And I have another reflection or question, you know, it's a bit more empirical, related to what Giuseppe and Marisabel were talking about. I mean, when we talk about citizen science, it seems that science is the starting point, right? You know, in the more formal perspective, I mean, how we present information in a more formal way. So in what way can this incorporation of different knowledges, you know, in a more anthropological sense of community, for instance, or of, you know, this knowledge that isn't necessarily science, how is that being assimilated by the formal science, right? In quotation marks. I mean, maybe Marisabel and Giuseppe, from a more empirical perspective, can actually give us an answer.
Do you want to answer, Jenny? And
Jenny, do you want to answer? Marisa? Or should we wait for next one?
So it was quite a complicated question. So I would like to answer it now. Otherwise, I think I will. So I think from the translation, you were asking about the fact that the creation of knowledge in citizen science has an implicit success for co-production of knowledge. So the bringing together of different knowledges. And is there a problem if you don't successfully co-produce that knowledge? Is that right? Was that what you were asking? Yeah. So one of the things I think that's really interesting, I wrote down a couple of times things Giuseppe and Marisa said in their fantastic presentation. So it may be the translation, but we had receiving the information and people's perceptions of risk. So one of the things that I think is really interesting is, and a little bit more experimental, is to not think that there is a right answer that we are trying to convey via the medium of citizen science. It is that what we're trying to do is understand better what are the most important dimensions of risk. And it might not be the hazard. But I guess our starting point that I'm thinking is that if we understand more about the hazard, we will probably do better at reducing the risk. And one of the things that, when you assume a citizen science a starting position that knowing more science will reduce the risk intrinsically, is that the citizens don't do very good science. And actually, this idea of the culture of questions means that it's okay if we end up with a position where co-production doesn't work so well, or we find out a little bit more about the hazard, but rather less about the risk. By paying a lot of attention to the process and looking at the evidence for how the process works, we're still making we will still make a really important contribution to how we understand and position ourselves with risk. So I think it's a really good point that there's a cause and effect, that you assume that the co-production of knowledge is happening. And I think when I said there's no evidence, I was probably better to say there's little evidence. There's some really great studies out there, and Eliana has sent us one as well. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is actually whether that results in new knowledge for everyone. And that's what I was trying to do with Batgirl and Spider-Girl, was show them that there's more than just scientific knowledge. So the starting point is science, but actually there's lots of different ways of describing hazard in the risk environment. Did I answer your question? Kind of. It's a good point though.
Marisa, Giuseppe, ¿quieren decir algo?
Marisa, Giuseppe, do you want to say something? Yes. For Marco. I mean, we can, as a conclusion related to your question, we can say that there are more and more citizen science projects in which people are involved in a more participatory level that goes beyond this, just producing the data and giving it to the scientist, right? I mean, now we have seen projects in which the citizen can actually, produce this data, but can also analyze it and, make use of this data. In Spain, there are many projects that have been promoted from theater, from arts, that include participation and that are recognized as science. Additionally, in Brazil, they have developed many projects, and we haven't seen this as something that isn't valid, from a scientific point of view. Rather, the wave, or the tendency kind of goes towards this area. I mean, this is the future that we have to work in, that knowledge and science is democratic, that we can access to it, that it's, free access for everyone, and that people can actually understand it and not just provide data. I don't know if Giuseppe wants to say something else.
No, I agree both with Jenny and Marisa. So let's go ahead with the questions. So otherwise we will run out of time.
Sí, muchas gracias. Yo creo que estuvieron.
Yes, thank you very much. I think both answers were very precise, and you replied what Marco was asking. Eliana and then Eva, I want to ask you to to be short and precise. I mean, we're running out of time as usual. We love to talk. Now, I mean, I had a couple of questions and reflections. Marisa was saying that citizen science is this doorway to make knowledge more democratic. And I always have this question, right? I mean, when the population has this knowledge, and already empowered, how can we enforce democracy? I mean, how having these tools to work in this territory can actually work for them. And it's complicated when we don't have these cooperation networks in place. So that raises the question, another question, what's the role for the municipality within this project, right? Because they haven't been really present here. We haven't really had a contact with them. We haven't really created stronger cooperation networks with the municipality. And we have to understand that when impacts in the territory, new planification or with an improvement of infrastructure to reduce vulnerability, well, you actually need the municipality as an actor, right? As a stakeholder. You can see that in San Luis de Miravalle, we require a very extensive work for sewage waters, with the map, the water treatment institution. We need to, we need things that the project needs to create, these allies. Guardianas de las Laderas, the project that you were talking about from Manizales, they have, that project was successful because there was a network of stakeholders, each of them with their own, function and roles. I mean, the municipality was there, the University of Manizales was there that, gave them the training to the guardians. It was also the private enterprise that also generated resources so that they could be successful. And obviously the community that was empowered by this work. And this knowledge that they gained, I mean, it all resulted in the success of the project. So that's the question. I mean, where's the municipality here? I mean, we can't really see their role yet. And afterwards, how can we actually access that democracy, once the community is already empowered? So it's not just hanging there, in the air. That was my question. Thank you very much, Eliana. I think that's a question for everyone. Marisabel, please, you can reply, but that's the challenge, that we all have. And I'm also seeing Marco there. How we are going to attract municipality, There's a couple of people here that work in the municipality, in the museum area. That's something. It's a start point, and we have to start working with the people from the risk management, security, and etc. But thank you very much, Eliana. Yes, I think that's a very important point you're raising. Marisa? Yeah, just shortly, I want to say that for a project to be successful, both, talking about Vigías and Guardianas, and for them to be, active nowadays, it's a joint work. It's not something that scientists can do alone or that the community can do alone. Not even the authorities as such can do it alone. It's a joint work between everyone, and it's a challenge for us, yes, to bring the municipality, into the case studies, because here we have a very complicated political context, right? Guardianas de las Laderas is a project that reached such a level that it doesn't really matter that the major changes, right? It's a project that's going to last through time, because they have created these networks from a more organized political perspective. And more precisely from a political decision, within their planning that's longer than any major or administration can be in office, right? Thank you, Marisa. And now, Eva, your question, please. Hello. something very, very short. I kind of like to think and, question certain things. And I have a problem with the concept of citizen science because I feel like it raises science above citizenship. So I don't know if we can't really think of on a different name, to talking about citizenship, science for citizenship, kind of changing priorities. I mean, kind of change the way in which we are communicating and we are involving the people that we are working with. Because the image that Jenny showed, mountain and with Batgirl and Superwoman. But if we start with that concept of science being the first thing, maybe that raises the problem, and we probably should have to think on what's the starting point, and that also has to do with where we want to, what point we want to reach. If our objective is to create knowledge just because we want to create academic knowledge, or we also want to have a more empowering perspective, this idea of making these engagement processes stronger. I think we could use a different concept or question, up to what point citizen science is the ideal concept that we need. Thank you very much, Eva.
Yeah.
Takes us good to the next exercise, I think, huh?
Terry,
Yeah, Jenny.
can I respond to that? I've now got the presentation downloaded, so good, and with the challenge that we have, because I think this speaks to precisely what we need to think about. So citizen science, one thing to remember, is just one of a suite of techniques that we will deploy. Citizen science we want it to align strongly with participatory techniques, which means we need to tackle head on this tension between empowerment and dichotomy, but also that we can take an open-minded approach to starting with the different balance of knowledges at the beginning. So that's what I was trying to show with the Spider Girls. So I'm going to share my screen now. Here we go. And just introduce a little bit the challenge that we have, which I started by trying to, I've been a little bit naughty and a little bit provocative here, and thought about citizen science taking that extreme view where the starting point is just the multi-hazards. So these are the different perspectives, and I think Alfredo and Marco make really good, and Eliana make really great points about the fact that we need to also engage with the municipality. So this is the space in which we're trying to empower the municipality to incorporate disaster risk reduction into their planning. This is the space in which we're trying to empower the local populations. This is the space in which we're trying to understand not just hazard, but multi-hazard risk. And then this is the space where we're trying to understand more about social science. So these are some of the techniques that we've mentioned here. And then what I thought we could do with the MAP challenge, we're going to have a little break and maybe finish the discussion, but I just feel to respond to Eva, this is a nice way to show this, is actually to get you to think about, this. So make that map better. So how can we take these citizen science techniques and make them do better with what we're talking about, with engaging the municipality or empowering the local community and aligning with the citizen agenda, or giving them power, as Eliana was talking about. So what we want to do is get you to break into groups, which we'll make up while we're having the break, with techniques that we might use in Keto. And we want you to be honest about the problems that you think there are with this entire approach of citizen science, because we're not going to do well unless we have an integrated approach, unless we have something with citizen science that is going to speak to reducing the disaster risk later on. My enticement to you this afternoon is that we have £60,000 to spend on lovely instruments and sensors. So just to keep the physical scientists happy with all the ontologies and epistemologies of what's right and wrong about citizen science, money and sensors. Okay, we do have this budget within the thing to try and think about what we want to do. So the last challenge that you'll have in your group is to think about, well, okay, we know the problems, we know what we think we want to do, but think logistically, because we have money, but we have less time, and there's all these problems with getting to know the community. So in your little groups, what can we come up with to solve those problems? So hopefully that'll give us a chance to kind of answer some of these really valid points that people have been raising. So sorry to interrupt with the next part, but I thought it was a good moment to do.
No, I think that's a good moment to also take a break. So, creo que Elisa tenías una pregunta, pero te voy a
I
pedir
think
que
Elisa has a question, but I'm going to ask, please, if we can ask your question after the discussion. Thank you. So we're going to take 10 minutes, 10-minute break. And in the meantime, Marisa, Giuseppe, Jenny, and Adriana are going to separate you into groups. So yes, 10 minutes, go, do whatever you need to do, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, so Jenny, Giuseppe, Marisa.
Yeah.
Okay.
How many groups?
So we have a lot of people here.
I prepared 5 groups.
Ay, gracias, Adriana.
Yes.
Adriana, you're wonderful. We love you.
And we were before 30 persons, but now we are 28. So we have one group of 4 people, and the rest are 6 people, and only one from 5. Okay, I think if you want to have someone specific together, let me know.
So I guess, Adriana, it's maybe the people who are very new to the project maybe should be mixed around. And then also, obviously, because we don't have translation, if we can try to have people who speak both English and Spanish in each group so that they can maybe help a little if people are having trouble.
Okay, I think we are, I try to let Malena with the new persons that are attending today. But I have also in the first group, Cesar with that can help us, and there we have a mixed group of people speaking Spanish and English together.
Maybe the group with Malena, it might be interesting if either Giuseppe or Marisa are with them. I don't know if that makes sense, because these are the people from the museum who we might be wanting to work with. So,
Perfect.
O sea, Adriana, si les pones a Giuseppe o Marisa con el grupo de Malena, sería chévere.
Te puse a ti, pero te puedo cambiar.
Ah, ok, o yo, estoy bien,
Sí,
déjame en mí ahí.
Sí, okay.
Sí. O sea, lo que quería es que uno de nosotros, pero
ok,
sí.
perfecto.
Ya.
Perfecto.
Okay. Y entonces Eva, sorry Jenny, Eva, que esté en otro, para que ella pueda ayudar a traducir. Giuseppe también puede ayudar a traducir si se necesita. ¿Quién más? Daniel, no, ya no le veo al Daniel, ¿o sí está?
Sí, está Daniel.
Sí, al Daniel también.
Ya me fui.
Cuidado, Daniel, no nos has dado el jugo hoy, ¿no? Okay, all right, yeah, so that was my comment, just Jenny.
Yeah, so I guess just for your benefit, Giuseppe and Marisa, we're running behind time. So we only have time to do one discussion group. So what I did with that slide, but I didn't translate it, is I put all the challenges into one slide so that people can have maybe about 20 minutes and then some plenary discussion. I think that would be good. Maybe I should put it into a Google Doc so that people can refer to it when they're in the groups, you think?
Yes.
Jenny, I think we need to give them only 15 minutes because they're going to come back. The meeting is until 5:45.
Yeah.
So we only have,
Okay, so those are the things. I translated thing about the money, but not how do we solve the problems. So should I turn that into a Google Doc just so people have it in front of them while they're discussing?
Yes, actually, yeah, I was going to do in case. So I opened the Google Doc, but I need the presentation. Or probably it's better if you can do, Jenny, because you have already the presentation, so you can copy and paste.
Okay.
Whatever, or just send me the presentation, send me the text, or.
Okay. So, and then there's the map as
Tenemos
well.
la presentación de Jenny cargada en folder. Giuseppe,
Just send
ya
it to you.
tenemos la presentación de Jenny en Google Drive porque ahí la traducimos contigo ayer, por si acaso, si es que queremos compartir el link para que la vean.
Ah, sí.
So just upload it into Google Drive, the 2 slides.
Yes, okay.
Teresa, revisa porfa tu WhatsApp para que veas cómo están los grupos. Te mandé una foto.
Ah, ya. Ya, gracias. Gracias, Adriana. Uf.
So Giuseppe, I'm sending you the 2 slides now. Is that the quickest way to do it?
Yeah, I think so. Hope so. Send me via email or also via chat. I'm not sure.
There you go. Go on. That should be it.
Yeah, let's wait. Yeah. I also
Okay,
don't have a very good connection, so let's hope it works.
It's good. I made it small.
So change to anyone with the link, edit, okay.
It would be quite nice to have some tangible things from this, I think. Okay, Giuseppe?
Yeah, I'm downloading. Sorry, it's very slow because my connection here is terrible. So I'll try to download. So do you want I put the slide shared with everyone, or do you want on some text that they might edit? What do you prefer?
Just share it so they can see, and then we can just report back.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Quickly.
Yes. Let me see. Come on. My God. Terrible. Okay, let's see. Let's see. I can open with Google Slides.
I just start everybody again, Teresa. All right.
Yes. Okay. So maybe everyone is back. Those who are still with us. Adriana is gonna put us into different groups, and
Yes.
Giuseppe or
Just give me a second. Yeah, just give me a second.
Before we go into the groups, Giuseppe is going to share something. Yes, on the Google Doc. So please open that.
Can you check if it works? Sorry.
Yes, but it's the whole presentation.
The whole presentation, Giuseppe.
Yeah, we just need one.
I sent you the little. Okay.
Yeah. So it's not really what we wanted it to be.
No, I can.
Jenny can do it. Maybe just.
Guys, I really like the idea that Jenny proposed of the culture of interrogation. So maybe something around that, if we can use to frame the, I don't know, this idea of citizen scientists around more like this.
Yes, thank you, Eva. Sí, the second link, el segundo link, por favor, si es que pueden abrir todos antes de que Adriana nos divide en los grupos.
If everyone can open the second
El que
link.
dice make the map better, hacer un mejor mapa.
Make a map better.
Sí, exacto. Entonces, por favor, abran ese documento porque la idea es que nos vayamos en grupos y luego vamos a discutir y regresar para tener una plenaria rápidamente. Vamos a tener 15 minutos, son las...
Short plenary session.
Bueno, y 25, depende de en qué lugar del mundo estén. Vamos a regresar a las
25, depending on where you are in the world.
5 a las 40.
We're gonna come back at 40. Yeah.
Y ya, Adriana.
And okay, Adriana, please do your magic. See you in a bit.
Y hasta plata. Bueno, dice, todos hablamos español o hablemos también y angloparlantes.
No, todos español.
Solo español, creo.
Todo español, qué chévere, eso está bueno. Ok, bueno, entonces vayamos leyendo y tratemos de hacer algo con este ejercicio, ¿ya? Ok, dice... tenemos a Adriana, por suerte, tal vez ella nos puede explicar, ella siempre está más enterada de todo. Dice, hacer un mejor mapa. Dice, agregue las técnicas en este dominio que podrían ser usadas en Quito. Dice, ¿qué problemas pueden presentarse con el uso de estas técnicas? Y dice después, tenemos 60,000 libras para gastar, pero menos tiempo del que teníamos en logística. Entonces, vamos a ver el mapa. Ya, esto... ok. Entonces, Adriana. Alguien está compartiendo Adriana, muy bien, gracias. ¿Estuviste por si acaso en la preparación de esto? Porque yo no entiendo bien lo que hay que hacer. ¿Estás ahí, Adri?
Yo lo que entiendo es que, por ejemplo, debemos basarnos en el que ya está lleno, en la parte del diagrama que está llena, y llenar las otras esferas que están vacías con técnicas correspondientes al campo que abarcan, ¿no? Y explicar qué desafíos podrían presentar esas técnicas. No, creo que no escribirlas aquí, los desafíos, pero sí como que hablarlos. Por ejemplo, en lo social, organizar un webinar con los habitantes de tal lugar para hablar de tal tema, algo así, técnicas de ese estilo, me imagino.
Sí, bueno, entonces empecemos viendo lo que dice.
Lo que yo entiendo, no sé si de pronto quiere preguntar a alguien más, porque es lo que yo entiendo.
Sí, veamos, o sea, son esas cuatro esferas que intervienen, digamos, cuando estamos hablando de cosas de riesgo, ¿no? O sea, primero tenemos las amenazas, bueno, puede ser cualquier evento natural que se presenta y que nos puede producir un impacto, ¿no es cierto? Y después está esa esfera social, la esfera de la ciudad, la esfera local, eso todavía me confunde un poquito, pero bueno, veamos qué han puesto en el caso de la amenaza, ¿no es cierto? Dice,
la local creo que corresponde al caso de estudio.
Local, sí, tal vez puede ser algo así.
Creo que
dice, la amenaza, dice, para la ciencia ciudadana, dice, datos de sensores para amenaza, ¿no? Adri, no me dejas leer.
Perdón, se movió algo en la pantalla, disculpa.
Ahí está.
No te preocupes, dice datos de sensores para amenazas y sismómetros, pluviómetros. Dice, eso como aparece, está como fue puesto, sí, no entiendo bien, bueno, pero los estudios de amenaza, datos de sensores, le han puesto como por fuera de todo, sí, en una parte donde no hay intersección con otras cosas. No sé si estoy entendiendo bien, ¿eh? O sea, como que esto de los datos de sensores como sismómetros y pluviómetros no se intersecta ni con lo social, ni con la ciudad, ni con lo local. No sé si están de acuerdo, así que sí me parece que está apareciendo.
O sea, lo que yo entiendo ahí es que eso es una técnica específica para entender la amenaza. Usar los sensores para entender la amenaza. Entonces, esa técnica es específica para esto y no se utilizaría, por ejemplo, un sensor para entender la parte social.
Ok, ya. Bueno, ahí podemos o no estar de acuerdo. Entonces, después dice, dice el mapeo con drones. Ahí sí hay una intersección con lo social. Y también dice datos de... ¿Qué dice? Datos de multitudes, mapeo de daños. Creo que nos debieron explicar un poco más de esto, pero bueno. Eso también está ahí, al menos como le veo, está intersecado con lo social. Esas dos cosas, mapeo con dron y datos tomados de mucha gente de alguna manera. Entonces, ya, ok, dice después narrativas sobre las amenazas. Eso ya está en donde se intersectan varios al mismo tiempo, para eso, ¿no es cierto?
Sí.
Está intersecado con lo social, con la ciudad, con lo local y con el conocimiento de las amenazas. Y lo mismo el mapeo participativo, ahí están metidos todos. Ok, ahora...
Lo
si
que
es
yo
que
no
más
entiendo es qué es esto de CBDRR.
Reducción de riesgos, desastres y no sé qué es la DLC.
Collaboration. La CB no entiendo.
Reducción del riesgo de desastres, BC, no sé qué será la BC. En España sí es, RRD es reducción del riesgo de desastres, pero BC no sé.
Y ya bueno, no sé.
Ok, ahora bueno, para mí esto no es un mapa, pero me imagino que nos piden mejorar, o sí, esa era, ¿no es cierto?
A ver, veamos
Nos
esos
piden
autores.
añadir técnicas, nos piden añadir técnicas. Por ejemplo, añadir una en lo social, otra que interseque lo social y lo de ciudad, y así. O sea, nos piden que añadamos, parecido a lo que ya está, pero que añadamos más cosas.
Ya, nos fregaron porque nosotros, bueno, Pau y Gladys tal vez, María Antonieta también estás ahí, qué bueno.
Sí.
Porque Valeria y yo somos justamente científicos de las amenazas. Y tal vez nuestras ideas respecto a qué se puede hacer en estas cosas sociales son limitadas. Entonces les invito a ustedes a si es que tienen ideas, se lancen nomás.
Sí. Una técnica sobre cómo entender la parte social del proyecto, ¿no?
Sí.
Yo más que como una técnica y una metodología, entendí también como que el tema de reflexionar en cuanto a los aspectos sociales. Y yo creo que parte del proyecto es de entender las comunidades en las que va a participar y tener unos límites en los compromisos que va a generar. Me pareció muy importante la acotación que hacía una de las chicas de... sí, por ejemplo, hay comunas y barrios en los que no se puede generar un compromiso que vaya más allá de su riesgo personal y de su integridad y sus condiciones materiales al enfrentarse al municipio y ser de repente ser expulsados del territorio al presentarse o al rebelarse. Entonces, más bien es como que una parte del proyecto tiene que tener, no sé si la palabra correcta sea hacer un estudio de la comunidad más cercana al territorio en el que va a intervenir, de sus condiciones materiales, de sus características sociales, y en función de eso decidir hasta dónde puede intervenir que no ponga en riesgo a la comunidad que está presente. eso como primer punto, como la evaluación de la comunidad que está alrededor. Y nosotros estábamos, o sea, ayer que hablábamos, nosotros, vengo de las artes, del centro de arte, era porque hablábamos justo que en la parte social es difícil que la gente, es lo que ustedes dicen y lo que hablaban también en la mesa, hay no un problema, pero hay como una distancia entre entender la ciencia y lo social. Ajá, como que de verdad fueran lenguajes tan disímiles que no tienen esa concatenación. Más bien pienso que son como formas de interpretar, y ayer nosotros les decíamos, ¿cómo creamos conciencia en las personas? Porque tal vez la tenemos, el problema es cómo de verdad reflexionamos sobre el riesgo que corremos al estar en una ladera, cerca de un volcán, lugar de inundación, en la costa, por ejemplo, etcétera. Y nosotros ayer proponíamos, que por eso muy humildemente estoy aquí, decíamos, si tal vez armamos una exposición desde el archivo, en el que la gente pueda sensibilizarse en torno a las problemáticas que implican los riesgos naturales y todo este tipo de catástrofes, etcétera, tal vez la gente sea más receptiva a entender el mensaje y a participar y a hacer presión. Porque no sé qué tan real es que nosotros podamos participar en una agenda pública. Yo, ciudadano normal, whatever, aquí, por ejemplo, no sé cómo incidir en una agenda pública que pueda cambiar estos aspectos, pero sí puedo aportar, como lo mencionaba en la metodología y en el manifiesto que tienen, es, por ejemplo, ahí en una parte del manifiesto decía, tal vez hagan las fotografías de este movimiento de la ladera, qué sé yo. Tal vez eso sí lo podría hacer, pero como lo decían, es importante entenderlo por qué lo hago y entender el beneficio que tal vez representa para mí. A mí no me gustó mucho el ejemplo de Colombia, en el sentido de que, bueno, tal vez hablo desde la ignorancia porque no lo hablamos a profundidad, pero no me hace eco eso de utilizar a las comunidades. Está bien un sueldo, ajá, pero el sueldo suena muy bonito, pero ¿cuánto es de ese sueldo? ¿Están aseguradas? ¿Hay una realidad económica que de verdad sostenga? Y no son, o sea, estos sueldos de las comunidades a veces para mí son en realidad palabras muy bonitas para decir tercerización de personas que no tienen derecho a salud. Por ejemplo, en la costa se utiliza mucho el seguro campesino, que es más económico que el seguro social del IES. Entonces, me gusta más pensar que hay unas opciones reales. Y yo dudo que el proyecto en serio pueda cubrir algo tan ambicioso como que el municipio de repente se haga cargo del grupo de personas a través de un sueldo. Entonces, ahí sí pienso, no sé qué tan fuerte es la Universidad de San Francisco en el tema de voluntarios, creo que sí es como muy grande, pero como ir limitando estos compromisos reales, ¿no? En el Estado se terminó siendo partícipe de pagarles a estas mujeres, pero no sé si en este proyecto también sea muy real el que pueda hacerse partícipe de la comunidad con un pago. Yo creo que no sé honestamente a dónde va. Y más bien yo lo limitaría al generar los compromisos con las comunidades cercanas a las que se va a trabajar. Ser muy claros. Miren, vamos a intervenir aquí con un estudio de monitoreo, necesitamos tales cosas, porque tampoco es tan malo el de tener estos límites claros. No pienso que sea como despectivo o que uno pueda sentir que no participa.
Nos quedan 2 minutos.
Por ejemplo, solo como para acotar lo que dice Gladys, nosotros hemos pensado también desde el Museo de la Ciudad, por ejemplo, el componente histórico es muy importante, como para ir también entendiendo la construcción de la ciudad y desde dónde se va la gente asentando, por qué se va asentando en estos espacios, directamente en el lugar del museo, partiendo desde el centro histórico como un lugar o un epicentro desde la construcción de la ciudad y qué ocurría alrededor. Nosotros lo veíamos desde ahí, con un componente histórico que involucra a las comunidades que están alrededor del museo y también, como decía Gladys, por ejemplo, nosotros quisiéramos definir específicamente a grupos en donde la parte educomunicacional esté presente, que serían profesores y estudiantes, o comunidades como adultos mayores en donde podamos hablar de la memoria de la ciudad. Entonces, tal vez no estamos hablando específicamente del tema del riesgo, cómo les afecta, digamos, porque viven en la ladera, pero sí un grupo de personas que han tenido como una experiencia a lo largo de su vida frente a estos temas y estos cambios y configuraciones de la ciudad. Entonces, lo que decía Gladys es como ir identificando las comunidades que pueden aportar desde sus prácticas cotidianas, desde sus propios saberes, también de una forma de divulgar esta información para que pueda haber como esta cuestión de prevención del riesgo, pero también una información de cómo se está configurando la ciudad en la cuestión territorial, más geográficamente hablando. Entonces, tal vez desde ahí el aporte incluso estábamos pensando como en el tema de la exposición, en el caso del Museo de la Ciudad, en una cuestión más artística, histórica, o sea, cómo los antiguos viajeros retrataban la ciudad de Quito, los volcanes, las fallas, las quebradas, y a partir de eso también ir como comprendiendo estos cambios en la ciudad. Tal vez por ahí serían como estas cuestiones más sociales, de vinculación un poco más específica con grupos específicos y sin caer en estas particularidades, como decía Gladys, ¿no? Que de abarcar otras cosas que tal vez no son posibles.
Ok, gracias. Sí, bueno, creo que se nos está acabando el tiempo.
Sí.
No hicimos esto, no es grave. Este ejercicio creo que no estaba bien explicado y es mejor que hayamos utilizado un poquito de tiempo para conversar con ustedes. Eso me parece valioso. No importa si no hacemos este ejercicio, no es... Yo no lo entendí, yo les voy a decir eso, no entendimos bien y estuvimos conversando de otras ideas que podemos tener justamente con ustedes, que eso es bien útil. O sea, les explico muy rápido, no sé qué tanto han estado interactuando antes y con qué personas en este grupo de investigación, que es un grupo grande. Pero, o sea, la idea justamente de este proyecto es, digamos, a nivel de la comunidad científica que estudia el riesgo por amenazas naturales, nos damos cuenta cada vez más de que obviamente hay que tratar de ser lo más, el tema del riesgo es tan amplio, ¿sí? Involucra tantas variables, tantas parámetros simultáneamente que debe ser necesariamente estudiado desde un punto de vista muy interdisciplinario, multidisciplinario, involucrando todo lo que se pueda, ¿sí? Desde las cosas que ustedes estaban mencionando, por ejemplo, esto de darle un lado artístico, el que toque a las emociones de las personas, por ejemplo, eso que sería como de un extremo hasta el otro, que es el extremo en el que el riesgo es visto exclusivamente desde el punto de vista de medir dinero, ¿sí? Porque al final, si tú preguntas a cualquier persona especialista en riesgo, el riesgo se mide en dinero, ¿sí? Y esa es la medida del riesgo, y ese es el otro extremo, ¿sí? Verle solamente así, el riesgo es dinero, y entonces tenemos que trabajar en ese sentido. Entonces, en este espectro tan amplio es lo que nosotros estamos tratando de empezar, ¿sí? Recién empezando en Quito, porque no se ha hecho mucho antes de esto. Se han hecho ejercicios académicos que van en este sentido muy matemático, digamos así, ¿sí? De las ciencias físicas, que tienen poco éxito, tienen poco impacto, y por eso estamos buscando impactar de otra forma, ¿sí? Entonces, esa es la idea. Ok, ahora, ¿qué hacemos con esto? No sé qué podemos decir solamente que hemos conversado un poco de cómo le están viendo ustedes desde el museo. ¿Con quiénes habían ustedes trabajado antes, Pau y Gladys? ¿A quiénes habían conocido?
El primer vínculo que tuvimos fue con Elisa y María Elena Bedoya. Con ellas nos acercamos en enero, de hecho, de este año. Fue como el primer acercamiento al Museo de la Ciudad, en donde se hizo el planteamiento del proyecto. Y claro, como les decía, la intención era como irnos desde el componente más histórico de los cambios en Quito y comprender el propio museo y el espacio geográfico alrededor de los cambios, y el trabajo directo con...
Fuimos los primeros en salir, todos los demás todavía están trabajando.
Y seguimos acá.
Sí, nos acá.
Lo están intentando.
Oye, Tere,
Sí.
no entendimos lo que había que hacer. Tal vez faltó explicar un poquito mejor qué era lo que querían que hagamos, pero bueno, no importa, nosotros hablamos de otras cosas, pero veamos qué sale con los demás.
Sí, sí, la idea es discutir cómo esto puede ser útil o no en nuestro trabajo, que me imagino que eso ya sí más o menos tocaron, y qué funciona y qué no. Y sí. Okay, so we're going to have a quick discussion here because we've really gone over time. So maybe group one, someone wants to start? Grupo uno.
Sí, creo que voy a hablar yo.
Yeah, I think I'm going to talk. Teresa from group one. Perfect. I'm going to share screen. I don't know if it's open. I'm just going to share my screen. So we discussed specifically, yeah, Andy was in our group and he was telling us that he'd be interested in working in Quito with seismic sensors, and that there's the possibility of, you know, taking them to the case studies, the different type of sensors that we can use. So we based our discussion on the challenges of bringing these sensors, these different types of sensors, to a community. You know, so we reached the conclusion that if we were to take a sensor, any type of sensor, we have to combine it with a participatory method of citizen participation in which people can participate. They can feel that that instrument, you know, that device is useful, yes, to gather data, but also to understand a space, you know, to have a better understanding of the space they live in. And in that sense, Andrew was telling us that the data, you know, from seismic activity can be transformed into audios, you know, and sounds. These sounds, people can listen to them and they can assimilate them in a better way, you know, that there's something happening underground, that Earth is actually moving. And that, well, in the end, we thought it was a very good idea, and that, yes, we could use it, but the challenge is in combining these methods, right? We're talking about physical methods, right? But we also have to combine them with anthropological aspect, and with sociology and art, you know, because that way people can understand that there's something working underground, and not just that it's just a data or a number, you know. Thank you very much, Marisa. Group number two. Group number two. Jenny, Eva.
Maybe Eva.
All right. Okay, Eva.
Okay. Nosotros tuvimos básicamente una...
We basically discussed about a real problem as a starting point in San Luis de Miravalles. That's the problem of the septic tanks that increment or increase the landslide risk, and it's a problem that the communities are aware of, but they don't know how to deal with it, or what solutions, what alternative solutions they have to replace them. And that's something that Eliana and Camilo are thinking on, you know, how to go into the neighborhood by addressing this problematic. And we also thought about how this can be a starting point, yes, you know, an experimental starting point with certain technical alternatives to replace the septic tanks. It can also lead to evidence more problems or threats or hazards, you know, like rainfall and in other places of Quito. You know, that's what we thought about at a neighborhood level. You know, to go in with our technical solutions, you know, and work with that community, and to link it with the municipal level. That's where Jonathan was telling us about this idea of City Lab and how it's a project that's moving forward and that we're working with already, you know, with different representatives from the municipalities. and also taking advantage of this moment in which we are updating many of these plans, it also poses an opportunity, perhaps from the examples that some of the communities we are working with, how we can form these planification processes that are happening from the municipality. So kind of thinking about how to link both levels. I don't know if I missed something.
Grupo 3, por favor.
No, it was great. Group 3, please. Yes, in group 3, well, maybe not all of us, but I did have the problem that I didn't understand what the exercise was about. It wasn't really clear, what this map was aiming at. So that kind of made for everyone to also not understand, and the exercise was kind of, damaged. But we took the time to discuss. There were 2 of our new members there with us, Pau and Gladys, that are from the museum's representatives in Quito, right? So we're discussing with them the ideas that they've had from this discussion. It's the first that they've attended. So, they're very new to this, and I tried to explain to them very quickly what's the broader perspective the project has, and so I'm sorry, we didn't do the exercise. No, you did do the exercise. The exercise was to discuss, and that was the whole idea, and also to be able to invite and share with our new fellow members, so it's ideas that are kind of, innovative for all of us, so thank you. Group 4, Malena. Yes, well, we discussed a lot of things. More than anything, we posed questions, right? And that was the main point. We also shared the experience of Dani Carvajal, who also comes from the Museum Foundation. And there were a lot of questions about who are we going to work with, right? Thinking about this broader city, going beyond the neighborhoods, and how or why we should think about, who's going to participate. Also derived from Eva's question, and if we should be talking about city science or science for the city. It's not just a change in the language, but how we are going to face this and what is it that we want to solve, right? In the end, what is it that people are actually interested in? Perhaps in that discussion, we should be using with, for, community, different words. And, it's perhaps an experience that we should be thinking about. Danny shared his experience with us and from the foundation, how they address this relationship, particularly with the project they implemented that's called Inhabitants of the Street. We thought about, that risk construction when we talk about communities that are precise, that precisely don't even have a place to live in. And Juan Gabriel was talking about this as well. How this also implies that we have to think about how these temporary settlements are built, because of these situations. So it was a series of questions that we raised of how we can incorporate new voices and how this co-production of knowledge is actually going to work. I think that we still need to talk more about that topic, but I think it was it was a session based on questions and answers and to getting to know each other, Thank you, Malena. And group 5, please. Lisa.
Would Elisa like to share, or shall I?
It's okay, you can share it.
Elisa. Okay, yeah, sorry, I didn't know who was sharing. So we looked together at something that causes multiple hazards, so rainfall on slopes. We thought about how at the household level, Elisa mentioned an idea of how households are talking about the need for water for their cultivation of plants. But then you have to hold that in balance with the water that you put on slopes that cause landslides. So we thought that there might be a good way of combining observations of water coming onto roofs and being collected and harvested, the idea of water harvesting, communities also monitoring rain gauges or soil moisture sensors to see how much water is going in the soil. We had Andrea talking about community engagement and how actually walking around or being in the community to look at these things together is a good idea. And then the science that comes from that is something we can look at. Where is the balance between collecting water from rain, removing it from the slopes to prevent landslides and flooding and erosion and debris flows. But on the other hand, people want to keep the water on the slopes for their households or for cultivating plants. So there's a balance between water for growing things in the soil, but if you put too much water in the soil, you can cause more problems. And we thought there was a sort of observation of how much rain is coming onto the slope, how much is going in the soil, how much is running in the drains. People can go out when it's raining and give observations, these kinds of things, and the discussion of how people perceive and experience water, whether it's a benefit or a problem, and how it works in each situation. I hope I've captured everything for our group.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, everyone. I'm conscious that we've used the time, 10 minutes already past the time that we had agreed. So I don't know if someone has some comment or a final thing that they would like to say. I see Valeria, ¿ya? ¿Quieres decir algo?
Sí, buenos días. Solo quería añadir algo.
Yes, good morning. I just wanted to add something that we discussed in our group that I thought was very important because no one... We mentioned it. Talked about a lot of things, you know? And in the local part, I think something very important we mentioned was that a good way to accomplish this approach to communities, besides, you know, a budget that we may have, you know, besides budget or long-term finance, like the two cases that Marisa was talking about, you know, it's very important to have the commitment of the communities in specific activities. You know, I mean, that engagement that we want to accomplish with the inhabitants. At the local level, we think that's a very important step. Also, at the city level, we wanted to address it from the historical component, in which we can see these educational and communicational processes so that people are actually involved. And that's when we would actually, you know, talk about empowering, you know, that's what we thought was, you know, critical. And on the social part, you know, we need to have a baseline of the situation that can actually allow us to understand better where we are and what we can actually reach. That's all. Yeah, I just wanted to share this with you guys. Thank you, Valeria. I think that as a response to that and from our group, Daniela made an observation, you know, I think that's very important, and that talks about the objectives of this project. And that's thinking on what problems we are going to solve with the people. Not the ones that are for us, you know, necessarily, but make the questions that Jenny is inviting us to do with and for the people. Not just, you know, questions from our part, but, you know, together. And I think that's a very nice reflection that connects, you know, with this idea of innovate. I want to invite you to continue to think about this idea of how we can innovate through our research practices, both in the academic part, but also in the engagement and impact, you know, and on how to generate change. So thank you very much for all of you. I think it was a very rich conversation. There's a lot to discuss, as usual in these workshops, but I'm happy, you know, because if they were boring, we would have done with them a while ago. So it's good because there's a lot of questions that we still want to answer, you know, and the challenge is how to use these methods or technologies. And for us that are working in the communities, how we're actually going to perform this work. That's a very important challenge, particularly for Marisa, Giuseppe, Elisa. They are the ones that are going to be working directly with the people, you know, Camilo as well, Eliana. So there's a lot to discuss. Malena, just the last thing. I've been working with Ellie this week, you know, all this week, talking with the people from Museum Foundation. everyone that's here are community mediators, so we have invited them, hopefully, in the near future, to share their experiences. Because they have a lot of experience in working in the neighborhoods, and that would be very enriching for us, to get to know what they've done, because they've done a lot. Oh yeah, thank you, Malena. Also to invite you for next Friday to do our fellow members from the museums. I think there's only 2 of you here left. The rest of you had to leave. But please come next Friday, and also the Friday after that. We have 2 more